actually right in downtown Gaylord. I cover permitting for inland lakes and streams, wetlands, and Great Lakes in Emmett and Charlevoix counties. I'm also a member of the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership. I'm on their both technical and training committees. And I'm also our Part 301 Inland Lakes and Streams Committee member. Don, over here.
I'm Don. I cover permitting for Otsego County. So if you live here and you're going to be doing something that we talked about today, you're probably going to be working with me, at least for the time being. I also cover compliance for all of northern Michigan. So if hopefully we don't run into you on that realm. But yeah, I just started working for EGLE not too long ago, and hopefully we'll give you some good information about shorelines today.
Before we really get into it, if you have questions at any point, feel free to just shout them out, throw up a hand. We can make this more of a conversation than us just talking at you too. So with the Water Resource Program, we implement statutes that regulate where the land and water meet, protecting the beauty and health of Michigan's inland lakes and streams, and supporting Michigan's recreational economy. One of our biggest, probably most difficult to grasp concepts is public trust. So there are some resources that are so important that they cannot be held in private ownership, and our water resources fall into that category. So what happens is our water resources are held in trust by the state. It's our duty to protect them for the benefit of all of the people. They belong to all of the people of the state of Michigan, so it's our job to make sure that uses such as fishing, navigation, recreation are protected for all of the people, not just the people who live on the water. And we do this through several different programs. You can look at the next slide. This is kind of a really big map that shows all of the different statutes that we implement. Specifically at our office, we do critical dune programs, Great Lakes enriched lands, shoreline protection and management. That applies to like high-risk erosion areas on the Great Lakes. We have our dam safety engineer works out of the Gaylord office. We regulate wetlands. We oversee the inland lake levels program under Part 307. But mostly today we're going to be talking about Part 301 inland lakes and streams. So Part 301 inland lakes and streams protects the habitats, uses, and health of inland waters, including inland lakes, which include both natural and artificial lakes that are 5 acres in size or larger. It regulates the construction and work within ponds that are connected to or are within 500 feet of an inland lake or stream. And it also regulates streams, which are defined as having a bed, banks, and evidence of continued flow. So this can include things that you might not technically consider streams most of the time, like sometimes a roadside ditch. If it is constantly full of water and flowing in a specific direction, that can be considered a stream under the statute.
Even if it's dry sometimes, as long as it has banks and a bed, it can also be considered a stream.
Yes, definitely. So a permit is required for any activity that takes place at or below the ordinary high water mark of an inland lake or stream, including building, placing or floating structures, and any sort of construction which includes excavation or filling. So that ordinary high water mark is kind of a tricky thing to define. We do have, like I said, Part 307 regulates legal lake levels. So that's a program where a lake like Wallen Lake has gone through the court system and they've established a specific elevation to be the ordinary high water mark of that lake. And then there's a structure that's built to maintain that legal lake level. Most of our lakes do not have that legal lake level associated with them. And so we have to rely on change where the ordinary high water mark, where the water level typically comes to. So a lot of times people will want to put a seawall a foot behind the ordinary high water mark. Well, first of all, you're pounding in your seawall, it's going to be below that elevation. Also, as soon as you put in that seawall, the waves and wind action are going to move the water to hit the seawall on occasion, and it's going to end up eroding the landscape between the natural ordinary high water mark and your wall, and it's going to actually end up enlarging the lake, so that's still going to require a permit. So basically, what we say is demonstrate to us that your project is going to occur in a location that's not going to interact with the ordinary high water mark. So what I've seen people do is sometimes they'll say, all right, I'm working 10 feet back, all my construction equipment is working landward of that 10 feet back where we're doing whatever work we are. Basically, it's on the property owner to show that whatever work is being done will not be interacting with that ordinary high water mark. So some examples of activities that require permit under Part 301 are shown here. Any sort of shoreline stabilization typically is going to require a permit from our department. Sometimes different vegetation control activities, if they're taking place in the lake, permanent docks or other structures that permanently stay in the water, construction of ponds, again, within 500 feet of the lake. Obviously, large projects like dam construction would require a permit. We do lots of different style projects. Go ahead. Next page. So once you figured out that you need a permit from our office and you apply, we don't just automatically give permits. We do have certain review criteria that we have to look through before we can determine whether or not we can issue you a permit. We have to consider the effects on the public trust. So how will this affect all of the other users of this water body? Riparian rights, is your structure, are you putting your dock that's actually going to be crossing over to your neighbor's property and within their riparian interest area? We can't permit that. Recreation,
services that we provide is a pre-application meeting. And when we go out there to meet you, we are going to have a discussion with you about sensitive resources on your property, what your proposed project would be overlapping with, and whether or not a permit application should go in. Like if you're doing that work way behind the high water mark, like Aaron was discussing earlier, and we determine at that time that no, this is not going to be affecting the high water mark, we can tell you then that you are not going to be within that sensitive resource.
Plus, supply you with a letter for when your neighbors ask,
Exactly.
did you get your permit? You say, no, I didn't even see, here it is. Says I don't.
And then we can also clarify some of that statute for you as well, what that means and how your project might comply with our statute. What we will not be able to do for you when we're on your property having that meeting is draw a map for you of where are the wetlands, where is the shoreline, where's that ordinary high water mark. Just because we are going to, our job is to assess the project that you're proposing, not necessarily plan out your project for you. We get into some touchy ground there because if we go ahead and plan out your project, then we're responsible. But we're also not going to tell you whether or not a permit would be issued for your project because again, we don't have all the information. We need you to go through that application process, give us all the available information, and then once we have all that information, we can have a conversation internally about whether or not this is a permittable project.
We can, however, tell you what you're proposing looks difficult to permit. Have you considered this alternative? That would be less harmful. We're always trying to help you get to a permit. We issue 95% of the applications that people apply for. So it might not be exactly what you applied for initially, but we're always trying to work with you to compromise to get something, to get you a permit that will do what you need to, what your project purpose is.
Yeah, and that process of working with you to get that permit looks a bit like this. So you're going to get an application in on our website, MindFire. That application is going to come to us. If it's perfect, we can move through it a lot faster, but I'll tell you right now, no application is ever perfect. We are going to have some questions on our end. What makes sense to you might not make sense to us. We're going to have a conversation with you through that website to try to make sure that we know exactly what it is that you're doing. So we'll go back and forth with a little bit with you about the details of your project, and then once that application is complete, that's when we go through the review. And essentially, like Aaron said earlier, we're just looking at what is the impact to resources that this project has, and then is it meeting our legal requirements, our statute that is our guidance for our permitting. So what we need from you guys is as much information as you can possibly give us the first time around. That's going to expedite your permit, so make sure you're reading those instructions as best you can. There are going to be multiple sections when you work through the website. Just make sure that you are filling out all of those to the best of your ability. If something doesn't make sense or if you don't understand the question, we can obviously work with you after that. Just try to get as much in there as you possibly can. And then at the end of that application, the website will calculate a price for you, and we obviously can issue a permit until that permit fee is paid. So this is what our website looks like. If you Google MindViro, M-I-E-N-V-I-R-O, this is the website that's going to come. And to apply for a permit, you're going to need to create an account. Once you get through that and you make your account, it will take you through this home page. And on the left here, you're going to start a new form. You're going to click on New Application. I can tell that this is a little fuzzy, probably for you guys in the back. But once you click on New Application, there are going to be all sorts of options, and this is going to be every service we do across the state. Most of them probably aren't going to apply to you. So you can search in there JPA for Joint Permit Application, and the first one that comes up, just read over it, make sure it's for your wetlands, lakes, and streams. That's the application that you're looking for right here. And then once we get into that permit application, you could fall into a number of categories. We are hopefully going to catch any exempt activities before you go through the application process, and an exempt activity is anything like a seasonal dock, a seasonal boat hoist, any seasonal structure that's coming out of the lake at the end of the year. That's exempt. You don't need a permit for that. We are going to move up to the next tier. These are our general permits.
on it. So that's something that we're going to consider with every application. Is there actually erosion occurring? These photos show erosion that's occurring from wind and wave action. So over here, you can kind of see, sorry it is a little blurry, that there's quite a difference between, there's quite a difference between where the water is and where the bank has eroded to. Definitely some erosion occurring because of wind and wave action. Again, you can see in the middle picture that the land is scouring out due to that wave and wind action. And then on this third one, it's a little bit hard to tell, but that's what we would call an undercut bank, where they have turf grass growing right to the water's edge. Well, turf grass has really shallow roots, and so often what happens is when waves hit your shallow rooted turf grass holds what's on top in place, but it scours out below it, and so you'll get an undercut bank. Another type of shoreline erosion is overland runoff erosion. This often occurs when you've got a really steep bank, or if you're doing some sort of other construction on your property. This type of erosion can be addressed typically without a permit. When you're seeing these like long gullies being formed, you can stabilize that with different soil erosion stabilization techniques above the ordinary high water mark without getting a permit from us. Oftentimes looking at things like planting to hold that sediment in place. We also a lot of times see human or wildlife access areas experiencing erosion. These are both just small areas where there's access. A lot of times if you have like a public park, there's going to be a large area where you have erosion where people are using the water. Sometimes concentrating the people used to specific areas with structures like stairways or beach area here or something can help minimize that erosion. Go ahead to the next one. This one is really common, something we see up here all the time, ice shelf or ice damage, especially on shorelines that actually already have some sort of stabilization. Ice is really, really strong horizontally, and when it hits a vertical or near vertical surface, ice wins. It ends up pushing that surface back, and so you get these ridges that form behind the shoreline. Ice is really less strong vertically. So if you have a really low slope shoreline, like a 1 foot vertical to 15-foot horizontal is the study that they did on the Great Lakes. So for every 1 foot of rise, 15 feet horizontal, the ice breaks as it rides up that really smooth slope. It gets pushed upward and it ends up breaking, and you don't end up seeing this ice shelf. So when you have vertical structures like this rock riprap that's just like a line